He thought she was just a poor housemaid, uneducated, silent, and invisible. But what he didn't know was that she owned the very mansion he was standing in. And she had a secret plan to test every inch of his heart. The morning sun filtered through the velvet curtains of the estate, casting golden rays over the marble floors and antique furniture of the summer-born villa. But the woman sweeping those floors was dressed not in silk or satin, but in a faded linen dress and worn-out slippers. Her name was Arya Thorne, or so the world once knew her. But today, she was just the maid. Hair tied back into a modest bun, face scrubbed of makeup, and eyes that once graced fashion magazines now hidden behind humility and silence. She looked like a servant, moved like a shadow, and spoke only when spoken to. Yet within her beat the heart of a billionaire heiress, and a woman on a mission. Arya had always known that money could buy comfort, but it could never buy love. Her childhood had been a blur of luxury and loneliness. Every suitor who knocked on the Thorne estate's doors came for her last name, not her first. And then came Nathaniel, the man she thought was different, who kissed her forehead when she cried and promised to build a home instead of just a mansion. But when her father's company briefly faced a scandal and their assets were frozen, Nathaniel vanished faster than the headlines could change. That betrayal didn't just break Arya, it reshaped her. From that day on, she swore, never again would she trust a man who loved her before knowing her soul. It had been 3 years since then. Her father had passed, leaving Arya sole heir to a sprawling empire. But rather than diving into galas and champagne towers, she disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no red carpets, just silence. And then came the plan. Arya purchased a quiet estate on the countryside outskirts of London, a place untouched by paparazzi or power circles. There she dismissed the entire staff except for a loyal caretaker named Elsie, who had raised her like her own. Together, they staged a charade. Arya would pose as the new live-in maid, and Elsie would introduce her as distant kin from Scotland. Her wealth would be locked away, her jewels tucked into safes, and her heart protected, at least for now. Then came Ayan Malhotra, a rising architect from Mumbai, sent to Summerbourne by a design firm for a month-long estate renovation. Arya had seen his portfolio, bold, imaginative, yet grounded. But more than his work, it was his reputation that intrigued her. Humble. Quiet. Doesn't chase clients, lets his work speak, Elsie had whispered. Maybe he's the one worth watching, Arya had agreed. And so she began, quietly observing from behind her mop and bucket, cleaning the very rooms that once would have been prepared for her as a guest. She watched how he treated the postman with more warmth than most treated millionaires. How he offered his sandwich to a hungry gardener without a second thought. How he touched the walls of the estate as if he was listening to their stories, not just measuring them for walls. But still, he barely saw her. Not out of cruelty, but indifference. To him, she was just a housemaid. A girl with soft eyes who moved silently from room to room. And that was the true beginning of Arya's test. She didn't want to be adored, admired, or chased. She wanted to be seen. Truly, wholly, as she was when the mask of money was gone. And so she swept, served, and stayed invisible, all the while wondering, if a man could love her when she had nothing, only then would he deserve her everything. Days turned into weeks inside the quiet grandeur of Summerbourne Villa. While the estate basked in the rhythm of restoration, woodwork being polished, antique chandeliers rewired, and garden fountains redesigned, Arya kept to her disguise, blending into the background like the scent of old books in the library. Every morning, she would rise before the sun, tying her hair tightly, slipping into the same faded uniform, and preparing tea that she would quietly serve Ayan Malhotra in the drawing room. And every morning, without fail, he would thank her, politely, courteously, but never look her in the eyes long enough to see the storm of questions hidden behind them. Arya had expected this. In fact, she had prepared herself for it. But preparation is not protection when it comes to the sting of being unseen. She had created this world, a carefully woven illusion, to test a man's love without the distraction of wealth. But somewhere along the line, she hadn't anticipated that being invisible would hurt this much. Ian wasn't unkind, quite the opposite. He treated everyone with decency, with gentle humor and unshakable patience. He spent hours talking with Elsie about the history of the house, praised the garden boy's roses, even fixed a broken gate with his bare hands instead of waiting for a contractor. But with Arya, there was a silent wall. A polite distance. As though she were nothing more than a tool in the house, useful, but replaceable. She started to doubt herself. Had she taken this test too far? Was her disguise too convincing? Or was it something deeper, that Ian, like all the others, had an idea of the kind of woman he could love, and a housemaid simply didn't fit into that world? One rainy evening, her heart cracked further. Ian was standing on the veranda, sipping warm chai, speaking softly into his phone. Arya passed by unnoticed, but the wind carried his words to her ears. "No, Mom, she's sweet, yes," he said, chuckling gently. "The maid? No, I'm not falling for her. I mean, she's kind and all that, but come on, she's not exactly someone I can imagine building a life with." Arya stopped mid-step. The tray of cups in her hands rattled, but she caught her breath and walked on. Those words echoed in her mind all night. She wasn't offended because he called her just a maid. That was the role she had chosen. She was heartbroken because, for a brief moment, she had started to hope. Not because he complimented her or looked at her differently, but because she saw goodness in him. A raw honesty in the way he respected people without expecting anything back. And in that goodness, she had foolishly planted a seed of possibility. But now, she lay awake in her modest room near the pantry, staring at the cracked ceiling and wondering if this was all just a cruel play, one she had written and cast herself in, only to become its most tragic character. Was it fair, even, to put a man through a test he never agreed to take? The next morning, Arya was slower with her steps. Her smile was dimmer. Her silence felt heavier. She didn't need him to fall in love with her yet, but she had hoped he'd see her. Not as the maid. Not as the heiress. Just as Arya. But instead, she realized something painful. He didn't see her at all. And that, perhaps, was more powerful than any rejection. The storm that night was not just in the sky. It was inside Arya too. Thunder rumbled over the estate, rattling the windows like a warning from the heavens, as if nature itself was tired of the lies being lived within those walls. Arya sat alone in the attic room she had claimed as the housemaid's quarters, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her thoughts spiraling into 1,000 directions. She had built this test hoping to uncover the truth. But so far, all it had revealed was the depth of her own loneliness. She had been preparing to end it, to take off the disguise, tell Ian the truth, and walk away with whatever dignity remained. But fate had other plans. It came in the form of a misplaced tape recorder. Earlier that day, Ian had left his audio recorder in the main study. He often used it to capture voice notes, for his design sketches. Arya had gone in to dust the shelves and found it lying on the old oak desk, blinking red. It was still recording. She picked it up with the intent to turn it off, but her name stopped her. "Arya," his voice said softly through the static. She froze. "I can't stop thinking about her." Ian's voice continued, slow and thoughtful, recorded earlier that morning. "There's something about the way she moves through the house. Like she's hiding something. But it's not fear, it's strength. A quiet kind of strength. I know she's just a maid, but she feels like more." Arya sat down slowly, her breath caught in her chest. The recorder crackled again. "I told Mom I wasn't interested," Ian admitted. "But the truth is I am. I just don't know if it's real or if I'm just drawn to a mystery I can't solve. And if I fall for her, and she turns out to be someone completely different, will I regret it? Or will I thank God for sending her to me?" Tears welled up in Arya's eyes. She held the small device like it was made of gold, as if it carried not just sound but salvation. For weeks, she had been judging him through silence, and watching him through masks. But this was his unfiltered truth, spoken to no one, not even knowing she would hear it. In that moment, her heart cracked open again, not from pain, but from the raw vulnerability of realizing that perhaps she wasn't as invisible as she thought. But just as hope began to bloom, fate dealt another twist. That afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Arya, still in disguise, watched from behind the curtain as three men stepped out, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, and holding briefcases. She recognized the logo on the car door, Winston and Company, a development firm notorious for tearing down heritage homes for commercial construction. Ian met them at the gate, confused at first. But within minutes she saw the heat in his voice rise. He was rejecting their offers, firmly. "This estate is not for sale," he told them. "It deserves to be protected, not demolished." He didn't know she was watching. He didn't know the owner was standing barefoot behind the curtain, watching his loyalty unfold without an audience. That was the moment Arya knew. This was no longer a game. It wasn't a test. It was real. This man wasn't perfect, but he was true. And sometimes truth shows itself not in grand confessions, but in quiet resistance, when no one's looking. As the rain softened and the estate fell into silence again, Arya clutched the recorder to her chest, whispering, "He saw me, even when I thought he didn't." And for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not as the maid, not as the heiress, but as a woman finally ready to be seen. The morning sun had never looked more honest. It painted the corridors of Summerbourne Villa with a quiet golden light, as if the house itself was ready for truth to finally breathe within its walls. Arya stood before the grand mirror in the East Wing dressing room, not as the maid, not as a hidden heiress, but as herself. For the first time in weeks she let her shoulders rest in their rightful posture, brushed out her long hair, and wore a simple white linen dress, not expensive, but real. The fear had faded. What remained was calm conviction. The game was over. The truth was ready to walk out of the shadows. She found Ian in the library, scribbling designs into a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't look up immediately when she entered, not expecting anyone except the maid. But when Arya stepped closer and softly called his name, this time not with a lowered head or a servant's tone, he looked up and froze. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't holding a tray. Her voice carried confidence, not servitude. Her eyes were the same, yet entirely different. "Arya?" he asked, uncertainty crackling in his voice like static. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "Arya Thorne. Heiress to the Thorne legacy. Owner of this estate. And the maid you've been living with for the last 6 weeks." Ian blinked, as if his brain had to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. He opened his mouth but said nothing. So she continued. "I needed to know who you were without the influence of wealth, name, or status. I've had too many people love my position, not me. So I created a world where you'd see me as a woman, not an heiress." Silence wrapped around them. Outside, birds chirped. Inside, time stood still. Ian finally stood, placing his notebook on the table. His expression wasn't angry, but wounded. "So everything was a test?" he asked quietly. "Every moment, every conversation, was it all fake?" Arya's throat tightened. "No. The moments were real. I was real. Just not the version you thought I was. I never lied with words, but I did hide behind silence." He paced slowly, trying to find his footing. "You trusted me enough to watch me. But not enough to tell me the truth?" Arya stepped closer, her voice gentler now. "I watched how you treated people when no one was watching. How you stood up for this estate like it was your own legacy. I heard what you said on the recorder." He turned sharply. "You listened to that?" "I wasn't going to," she admitted. "But I did. And it showed me something I was too afraid to believe, that you did see me. That even behind the disguise, something about me mattered to you." He looked down, jaw clenched, fighting 1,000 thoughts. Then he whispered, "I didn't fall for the maid, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. About you. I just didn't know what I was feeling." Arya stepped even closer. Now you do. And so do I. He looked up into her eyes, no longer with confusion, but with clarity. I'm not angry, he said at last. Just stunned. You showed me how much I still judge people by labels. But you also showed me how much depth love can have, when it's not built on surface things. They stood there, two souls stripped bare of disguise, pride, or pretense. And for the first time, they weren't divided by wealth or roles, but united in truth. Arya took a slow breath and asked the one question that mattered now. Can we start over, without the lies? Ian smiled, slow, real, and certain. Only if I get to make the tea this time. And just like that, the storm that had brewed for weeks dissolved into the morning light, leaving only two people, finally seeing each other for who they truly were. Months passed like seasons turning pages, gently but with quiet certainty. Summer-born villa no longer echoed with secrets. It breathed freely now, alive with laughter, slow morning walks, and conversations that flowed without hesitation. Arya and Ian didn't rush into romance like characters in a fairy tale. Instead, they rebuilt from the ground up, layer by layer, like restoring a forgotten room in an old home. Some days, they talked for hours beneath the oak tree in the garden. Other days, they simply existed in the same space, content in silence. There was no longer a mask to wear, no test to pass. Arya, once afraid of being seen as just an heiress, now felt more human than she had in years. And Ian, who had once judged what love should look like, learned that depth often comes disguised in simplicity. It was during a rainy Sunday afternoon, as they organized books in the old library, that Ian finally turned to her and said, I think I fell in love with the Maid, before I knew her name. And now, I love the woman behind it even more. Arya didn't answer with words, she just smiled, eyes brimming with quiet tears, and took his hand. They didn't plan a grand wedding or throw a public engagement. Instead, they began their life together by opening a foundation, one that provided shelter and vocational training to women who had been invisible in society, just as Arya had once made herself invisible. They used the estate not as a monument to wealth, but as a sanctuary for healing and truth. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Ian gave Arya a small gift, a silver key on a chain. It's the key to the first home I ever designed on my own, he said. And I want it to be ours. No lies. No roles. Just you and me. Arya held the key in her palm, closed her fingers around it, and whispered, This is the first time I've ever felt chosen. Not for what I have, but for who I am. As they stood there, in the very room where her story had begun with a broom and a bucket, she realized something. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks and music. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence, revealed in mistakes, and tested by truth. It survives not because it's perfect, but because two people are willing to strip away everything false and choose each other, again and again. The girl who once pretended to be a maid had found the man who saw past the apron. And the man who once judged her role had fallen in love with her soul. In the end, it wasn't a story about deception, it was a story about discovery. And in that discovery, they found a love more real than either had ever dreamed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Subscribe now for more powerful stories that stay with you long after they end.